The crack of gunfire shattered the peaceful evening on the Anderson farm, sending a flock of startled birds into the darkening sky as Madeline Anderson watched in horror through the cabin window as 3 riders approached. Her sister Margaret clutched her arm, fingers digging into Madeline's sleeve as their father collapsed in the yard, blood blooming across his shirt like a gruesome flower. "Run, Maggie," Madeline hissed, pulling her younger sister toward the back door. At 19, Madeline had promised their dying mother she would protect her 17-year-old sister, a promise that now burned in her chest as acrid smoke began to fill the cabin. "They're setting fire to the house. We need to get to the root cellar." It was 1875, 5 years since they'd settled in Eagle Springs, Colorado, their father determined to build a new life after their mother's passing. The small mining town nestled in the shadows of the Rockies had been peaceful, at least until gold was discovered on their property last month. "What about Pa?" Margaret sobbed, her blue eyes wide with terror as flames began to lick at the wooden walls. "Pa's gone," Madeline said, her voice cracking as she forced the brutal words past her lips. "And we will be too if we don't move now." They slipped through the back door as the front of the cabin erupted in flames. Crouching low, they ran toward the root cellar dug into the hillside behind the house, the cool spring evening air offering little comfort as they heard men's voices shouting, "Check the back." "The girls have to be here somewhere." Madeline recognized that voice. Vernon Blackwell, owner of the largest ranch in the territory and a man who'd made no secret of wanting their land. Her father had refused to sell, even after discovering gold in the creek that ran through their property. Now it seemed Blackwell had decided to take what he wanted by force. The sisters huddled in the darkness of the root cellar, breathing in the earthy scent of stored potatoes and onions, listening to the men destroying what remained of their home. "When they leave, we'll run to town," Madeline whispered, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Sheriff Dawson will help us," but they never got the chance. The cellar door was wrenched open, and the leering face of one of Blackwell's men appeared, his yellow teeth gleaming in the light of the burning cabin. "Well, look what we found here," he said, grabbing Madeline's arm and yanking her up the steps. "Boss, I found the Anderson girls." Blackwell rode over, his massive frame blocking out the firelight. "Good evening, ladies. I'm afraid your stubborn father has met with an unfortunate accident. You murdered him," Madeline spat, struggling against her captor's grip. "Sheriff Dawson will hang you for this." Blackwell laughed, the sound chilling in its casualness. "Sheriff Dawson won't be hanging anyone. He works for me just like everyone else in Eagle Springs." His eyes narrowed. "Now, there's the matter of your father's claim. I'll need you both to sign it over to me." "We'll never sign anything," Madeline said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I figured you might say that." Blackwell nodded to his men. "Tie them up. We're taking them to the old mining cabin up in Timber Pass. They'll be more reasonable after a few days without food or water." As they were bound and thrown across the backs of the Outlaws' horses like sacks of grain, Madeline caught sight of their father's still form in the yard. She silently vowed that she would get justice for him and keep her sister safe, no matter what it took. Miles away, Samuel Garrett sat at a corner table in the Eagle Springs saloon, his hat pulled low over his eyes. At 26, he'd already lived more lives than most men twice his age Union cavalry during the war, Pinkerton detective after, and now a bounty hunter tracking men who'd rather not be found. His latest quarry had led him to this small mining town, but something about the place set his instincts on edge. The saloon doors swung open, and Sheriff Dawson entered, speaking in hushed tones to a man Sam recognized as Vernon Blackwell, the cattle baron whose reputation had preceded him. Sam had heard whispers about Blackwell's methods of expanding his holdings, none of them legal or ethical. "Anderson problems taken care of," the sheriff muttered, not realizing how sound carried in the nearly empty saloon. "Girls are gone too." "Good," Blackwell replied. "Let's keep it quiet for a few days. Then we'll announce that Anderson sold me his claim and left town with his daughters." Sam's interest peaked. He'd been staying at the boarding house run by Eliza Johnson, whose daughter Hannah was friends with the Anderson girls. Just yesterday, Hannah had mentioned that the Andersons had struck gold on their property and were planning to expand their farm. Finishing his whiskey, Sam left a coin on the table and slipped out the back door. Something wasn't right, and his instincts had never steered him wrong before. By the time Sam rode out to the Anderson farm, the cabin was nothing but smoldering ruins. In the gray light of dawn, he dismounted and circled the property, finding Daniel Anderson's body hastily buried in a shallow grave behind the barn. "Damn," Sam muttered, kneeling beside the disturbed earth. This was no accident or fair fight, this was murder. Further investigation revealed hoofprints leading away from the property at least 3 riders, plus 2 horses carrying heavier loads than usual. Sam had tracked deserters through the swamps of Georgia and fugitives across the Arizona desert. Following Blackwell's men would be challenging, but not impossible. Returning to town, Sam quietly gathered supplies. He couldn't go to the sheriff, who was clearly in Blackwell's pocket. Instead, he sought out Hannah Johnson, who confirmed that Madeline and Margaret Anderson were nowhere to be found. They would never leave without saying goodbye, Hannah insisted, her eyes filled with worry. And they certainly wouldn't leave their father. "I'm going to find them," Sam promised, not entirely sure why he was getting involved. Maybe it was the war years that had left him unable to ignore injustice, or maybe it was something about Hannah's description of Madeline Anderson strong-willed, loyal, and brave that made him determined to help. "Madeline will fight back," Hannah said. "She's not one to surrender even against the likes of Blackwell." Sam nodded, thinking that might keep the girls alive, but it could also get them killed. "I'll bring them home," he said, mounting his horse. "Tell no one what you know or what I'm doing." As he rode out of town, following the trail that led toward the mountains, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue mission would change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The mining cabin was little more than a shack clinging to the mountainside, its weathered logs offering scant protection from the spring chill that descended each night. Madeline sat with her back against the wall, Margaret's head resting in her lap as her sister finally slept. Their hands were raw from the rough ropes that had bound them during the journey, and their bodies ached from being thrown across the horses. 3 days had passed since they'd been brought here. 3 days of refusing to sign the papers Blackwell had left, transferring ownership of their farm and the gold claimed to him. 3 days of declining food and water, fearing it might be poisoned or drugged. The only reason they weren't starving was because one of Blackwell's men, a younger one called Jeb, had secretly left them clean water and jerky when the others weren't looking. Madeline couldn't figure out if he was being kind, or if this was some strategy to gain their trust. "We can't keep refusing to eat," Margaret whispered, waking from her fitful sleep. "We need strength if we're going to escape." Madeline brushed a strand of blonde hair from her sister's forehead. "I know, Maggie, but we have to be careful." The cabin had one small window and a solid door secured by a heavy wooden bar on the outside. The Outlaws, 3 of them, took turns standing guard, though they spent most of their time playing cards around the campfire outside. "I've been watching them," Madeline said softly. "The tall one with the beard drinks until he passes out during his night watch. The one with the scar checks the horses every hour like clockwork, and young Jeb is terrified of Blackwell. I think he might be our way out." Margaret sat up, her eyes shining with newfound hope. "How?" "I'm going to convince him to help us. He's not like the others, he keeps apologizing when they're not listening." Before Margaret could respond, they heard the sound of horses approaching. Peering through the dirty window, Madeline saw Vernon Blackwell himself riding up with another man she didn't recognize. "Stand up straight," she told her sister. "Don't show fear." The door swung open and Blackwell entered, his massive frame filling the doorway. Behind him stood a thin man in an expensive suit, looking uncomfortable in the rustic surroundings. "Ladies," Blackwell said with a mock bow, "I'd like to introduce Mr. Harrison Fulton, representative of the Rocky Mountain Mining Company. He's very interested in your property." "Our property is not for sale," Madeline replied coldly. Blackwell's false smile disappeared. Your father's death was unfortunate, but business must continue. Mr. Fulton here is prepared to offer a generous sum for the claim enough for two young ladies to start new lives far from here. After you murdered our father, Madeline stepped forward, anger overcoming fear. We'll see you hang first. Blackwell moved with surprising speed for such a large man, his hand closing around Madeline's throat. Listen carefully, girl. You're going to sign those papers or your sister will suffer for your stubbornness. He released her, and she stumbled back, gasping for air. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, my men get to have some fun with the younger one. As they left, slamming the door behind them, Margaret collapsed into terrified sobs. Madeline held her close, her mind racing. They were running out of time. Outside, as darkness fell, she heard Blackwell giving instructions to his men before he and Fulton rode away. If they don't sign by morning, make the younger one scream enough that the older one changes her mind, but don't damage the merchandise permanently. Madeline felt sick with fear, but also more determined than ever. They had to escape tonight. Sam Garrett had been tracking the outlaws for 3 days, following their trail through forest and over rocky terrain. They weren't making much effort to hide their tracks, clearly confident that no one would come looking for the Anderson sisters. It was near sunset on the 3rd day when he spotted smoke rising from a clearing ahead. Tethering his horse to a pine tree, Sam crept forward through the underbrush, his hand on his Colt revolver. The scene before him confirmed his suspicions. A small cabin stood on the edge of the clearing, with 3 men lounging around a campfire. There was no sign of the Anderson sisters, but a heavy bar across the cabin door suggested they were locked inside. Sam studied the men carefully. One was old and grizzled, with a scar running down his cheek. Another was tall with a thick beard, already drinking heavily from a bottle. The third was younger, barely more than a boy, looking uncomfortable and out of place. As Sam watched, 2 more riders approached, one he recognized as Blackwell, the other a stranger in city clothes. They entered the cabin briefly, then emerged and spoke to the men before riding away again. Sam needed to get closer to hear what was happening inside that cabin. Moving silently through the trees, he circled around behind the structure, finding a small window at the back. Voices drifted out, female voices discussing escape. Have to try tonight, Maggie, once Jeb takes over the watch. But what if he won't help us? Then we'll have to create a distraction. I've been working on loosening this floorboard. If I can pull it up, we might have a weapon. Sam smiled grimly. Hannah had been right about Madeline Anderson's spirit, but determination alone wouldn't get them past 3 armed men. Night fell, and the men around the campfire began to settle in. As Sam had anticipated, they established a watch rotation, with the bearded man taking first shift while the others bedded down in a smaller lean-to structure nearby. Sam waited patiently, watching as the bearded man drank steadily from his bottle. Within an hour, his head began to nod, and soon after he slumped forward, snoring loudly. This was the moment. Sam crept toward the cabin, but before he could reach the door, it opened, and the young outlaw, presumably Jeb, slipped inside with a canteen and bundle. Sam froze, then moved to the window to listen. I brought more water and some biscuits. Jeb's voice was hushed. And I want to help you get away from here. Why would you help us? Madeline's voice was suspicious. I didn't sign up for murder or what they're planning to do to your sister. I just needed money for my ma's medicine. The boy sounded genuinely distressed. Blackwell said we were just going to scare your pa into selling. I didn't know they were going to kill him. If you help us escape, Blackwell will kill you too, Margaret said softly. Not if I leave these parts. My ma passed last month anyway. There's nothing keeping me here. Jeb's voice strengthened with resolve. I can get you 2 horses, but you'll have to wait until Scarface is asleep. He takes over watch at midnight, but he always checks the horses first. When he does, I'll create a distraction and you run for the trees to the west. The horses will be waiting there. Sam smiled in the darkness. Perhaps he wouldn't need to intervene after all. But he would stay close, just in case this young outlaw's courage failed or his plan went awry. At midnight, the watch changed as predicted. The bearded man stumbled off to the lean-to, and the man with the scar took his place by the fire. True to Jeb's information, Scarface immediately walked to check on the horses tethered at the edge of the clearing. Sam watched as Jeb slipped away from the lean-to and moved toward the cabin. But instead of releasing the captives, he stopped and looked around nervously, clearly having second thoughts. Sam cursed under his breath. The boy's resolve was faltering. At that moment, Scarface noticed Jeb's movement. "What are you doing, boy?" he called out, his hand moving to his gun. Everything happened at once. Jeb froze, Scarface drew his weapon, and the cabin door suddenly burst open as Madeline Anderson emerged, wielding what looked like a broken floorboard. She hadn't waited for rescue, she'd created her own opportunity. Sam didn't hesitate. Drawing his Colt, he fired a shot that sent Scarface's gun flying from his hand. The outlaw howled in pain and confusion, looking wildly around for the source of the shot. "Run!" Sam shouted to the sisters, stepping out from the trees and firing again to keep Scarface pinned down. Madeline grabbed Margaret's hand, and they bolted toward the western edge of the clearing. Jeb, seizing his chance for redemption, ran for the horses, untethering two and leading them toward the fleeing women. The commotion woke the bearded man, who stumbled out of the lean-to, firing blindly into the night. Sam ducked behind a tree, then emerged to place a carefully aimed shot that dropped the drunk outlaw where he stood. Scarface, recovering from his surprise, had retrieved his gun and was now firing at Sam, forcing him back into cover. "You've made a big mistake, stranger," he shouted. "Blackwell will hunt you down for this." "He can try," Sam replied, waiting for Scarface to expose himself as he changed position. When he did, Sam's shot caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. A second shot ensured he wouldn't be following anyone. By the time Sam reached the western edge of the clearing, Jeb had helped the Anderson sisters mount the horses. The young outlaw looked terrified but determined. "Go with them," Sam told him. "Take them down to the valley, then circle back east. I'll meet you at Cedar Creek by dawn." "Who are you?" Madeline asked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "Name's Samuel Garrett. I've been tracking you for 3 days." Sam tipped his hat. "Now go, before more of Blackwell's men show up." As they rode away, Sam returned to retrieve his own horse. This rescue was far from over. Blackwell wouldn't give up his prize so easily, and the nearest law that wasn't in his pocket was 2 days' ride away. Dawn broke over Cedar Creek, painting the landscape in hues of gold and amber. Madeline sat on a fallen log, watching as Samuel Garrett checked the perimeter of their small camp for the 3rd time. Margaret slept nearby, exhausted from their nighttime escape, while Jeb nervously tended the small fire. "You should rest," Sam said, approaching Madeline. "We've got a long journey ahead." She shook her head, her auburn hair catching the early morning light. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see my father." Her voice trailed off. Sam sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm sorry about your father. From what I gathered in town, he was a good man." "The best," Madeline agreed, finally allowing herself to feel the grief she'd been holding at bay. "He brought us west after my mother died, determined to build something lasting for us." She wiped away a tear with the back of her hand. "Now everything he worked for is gone." "Not everything," Sam said quietly. "His daughters are alive, and Blackwell hasn't gotten the gold claim yet." Madeline studied the man beside her. Samuel Garrett was tall and broad-shouldered, with deep-set eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and a thin scar ran along his jawline. He wasn't conventionally handsome, but there was something compelling about his quiet strength. "Why did you come after us?" she asked. "You don't know us." Sam was silent for a moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I've seen too many men like Blackwell take what they want without consequence," he finally said. "After the war, I promised myself I'd never stand by while the strong preyed on the weak." "We're not weak," Madeline said firmly, Sam's lips curved in a rare smile. "No, madam, you certainly are not." Breaking out with a floorboard as a weapon proves that. For the first time in days, Madeline felt a spark of hope. Perhaps they would survive this after all. "What's the plan now?" she asked. "We need to get you and your sister somewhere safe, then gather evidence against Blackwell." Sam's expression turned grim. The problem is, his influence runs deep in these parts. The nearest honest law I know of is Marshal Collins in Silverton, and that's a good 2 days' ride through difficult country. And Blackwell will be hunting us the whole way, Madeline concluded. Yes. Sam didn't sugarcoat the danger. We'll head north through the high country, then circle back east toward Silverton. It's the longer route, but less predictable. Margaret stirred and sat up, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Are we safe? She asked, her voice small and frightened. For now, Sam assured her, but we should move soon. Jeb brought them coffee in battered tin cups. I overheard Blackwell telling Fulton that he has men watching all the main trails, he said nervously, and there's a camp of his hands at Broken Ridge, right along the northern route. Sam nodded, absorbing this information. Then we'll have to be extra careful. Do you know these mountains well, Jeb? The young man nodded. My pa was a trapper. I grew up learning every trail and deer path in these parts. Good, you're our guide then. Sam turned to the sisters. Can you both ride well? Madeline nodded. Our father taught us we can keep up. Then let's pack up and move out. Sam doused the fire. We'll follow Cedar Creek upstream, then cut across Thunder Pass. Within the hour, they were mounted and moving, Sam leading the way with Jeb close behind, followed by the sisters. The horses moved carefully along the rocky creek bed, leaving minimal tracks for pursuers to follow. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Madeline found herself studying Sam's straight back and broad shoulders. There was something reassuring about his presence, a quiet confidence that made her feel safer despite their desperate situation. By midday, they had reached Thunder Pass, a narrow gap between towering rock walls. The air was cooler here, and patches of snow still clung to the shadowy places despite the late spring date. We'll rest the horses here, Sam announced, dismounting. There's a spring just around that bend. While the others watered the horses, Sam climbed a nearby outcropping to survey their back trail. Madeline followed him, her legs stiff from riding. See anything? She asked, joining him on the rocks. Sam handed her his spyglass. Look there at the valley floor, 3 riders moving fast. Madeline peered through the glass, her heart sinking as she spotted the distant figures. Blackwell's men, most likely. Sam's face was grim. We need to move faster. As they scrambled back down to the others, a shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. A bullet struck the rock near Sam's head, showering them with stone fragments. Get down, Sam shouted, pulling Madeline behind a boulder as more shots followed. They were closer than I thought, he muttered, drawing his rifle from its scabbard. They must have split up to cover more ground. Margaret and Jeb had taken cover behind the horses, their eyes wide with fear. What do we do? Margaret called, her voice trembling. Sam assessed the situation quickly. The shooters were positioned on a ledge above the trail behind them, effectively blocking their retreat. We push forward, he decided. Jeb, is there another way through this pass? The young man nodded. There's an old game trail that branches off about 50 yards ahead. It's steep but passable. Mount up, Sam ordered. I'll cover you. When I give the signal, ride hard for that trail. Madeline hesitated. What about you? I'll be right behind you, Sam promised, though his eyes told a different story. He was preparing to stay behind and hold off the pursuers. No, Madeline said firmly. We go together or not at all. Sam looked like he wanted to argue, but another bullet striking nearby made the decision for them. Fine, get ready to ride on my signal. He fired several shots toward the ledge, forcing their attackers to take cover. Now, he shouted. The 4 riders burst from behind the rocks, spurring their horses toward the gap Jeb had indicated. Bullets kicked up dust around them, but the distance and their speed made them difficult targets. Jeb led them onto a narrow path that climbed steeply up the canyon wall. The horses struggled for footing on the loose shale but kept moving forward. They can't follow us all at once on this trail, Sam said, bringing up the rear. That'll slow them down. They climbed higher, the path growing increasingly treacherous. Below them, they could see 2 of Blackwell's men attempting to follow, while a third had ridden back down the pass, presumably to find another route. By the time they reached the top of the ridge, their horses were lathered with sweat and breathing heavily. The view spread out before them, endless mountains and valleys with no sign of civilization. "We'll push on until dusk," Sam decided. "Put as much distance between us and them as possible." As they rode through the afternoon, Madeline found herself drawing closer to Sam, asking him about his life before coming to Eagle Springs. He was reluctant at first, offering only sparse details about his time in the Union Cavalry and later work as a Pinkerton agent. "And now?" she asked as they navigated a particularly narrow section of trail. "What brought you to our town?" "I was tracking a counterfeiter," Sam admitted. "He was last seen headed for the mining camps around Eagle Springs. But when I overheard Blackwell and the sheriff talking about what they'd done to your family, finding you became more important." "What about your counterfeiter?" Sam shrugged. "He'll still be running when this is done." Something in his tone made Madeline wonder if there was more to his story than he was sharing, but she didn't press. Everyone had secrets, especially in these wild lands where many came to escape their pasts. As the sun began to set, they found a sheltered hollow between two rock formations, well hidden from the trail and with good visibility of the approaches. "We'll camp here," Sam announced. "No fire tonight." They ate a cold meal of jerky and hardtack, speaking little. Exhaustion had caught up with them all, especially Margaret, who fell asleep almost immediately, her head pillowed on her saddle. Jeb took the first watch, positioning himself on a rock outcropping where he could see the trail they had followed. Sam sat beside Madeline, their shoulders almost touching in the growing darkness. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming after us." Sam nodded, his profile strong in the fading light. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be another hard day." But Madeline found sleep elusive, her mind filled with images of her father's death and the uncertain future that awaited them if they survived this ordeal. Beside her, Sam sat still as stone, his eyes scanning the darkened landscape for any sign of pursuit. In that moment of shared vigilance, something shifted between them, a connection formed in danger and grief that neither had expected but both recognized. Without speaking, Sam reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her cold fingers. They sat that way until the moon rose high, two souls finding comfort in the simple human contact that reminded them they weren't alone in the wilderness. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with frost glistening on the sparse mountain vegetation. They set out at first light, Jeb leading them along game trails and forgotten prospector paths that wound through the highest reaches of the mountains. By midday, they had descended into a densely forested valley, the trees providing welcome cover from any watching eyes. They paused at a small stream to water the horses and rest briefly. "How much farther to Silverton?" Madeline asked, splashing cold water on her face. "If we keep this pace, we should reach it by tomorrow afternoon," Sam replied, studying a tattered map he'd pulled from his saddlebag. "But we'll have to cross open country for the last few miles. That's where we'll be most vulnerable." Madeline nodded, her eyes straying to Margaret, who was sitting quietly by the stream. Her younger sister had barely spoken since their escape, the trauma of their father's murder and their own abduction weighing heavily on her. "She'll be all right," Sam said, following Madeline's gaze. "She's stronger than she looks. She's your sister, after all." The unexpected compliment brought a faint blush to Madeline's cheeks. "Our mother always said Maggie had the gentle heart and I had the stubborn one." "Stubbornness can keep you alive out here," Sam observed. "So can gentleness in its own way." Before Madeline could respond, Jeb appeared from the trees, his face tense. "Riders coming up the valley," he reported, 6 of them moving fast. Sam was immediately alert. "How far?" "Maybe 2 miles back, following our trail." "Mount up," Sam ordered. "We need to reach higher ground." They rode hard through the afternoon, climbing out of the valley and onto a barren plateau swept by cold winds. Their horses were tiring, struggling to maintain the grueling pace over the difficult terrain. "We can't keep this up much longer," Madeline called to Sam as they paused at the edge of the plateau. "The horses need rest." Sam nodded grimly. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles ahead. We can take shelter there for the night." The line shack turned out to be little more than a tumble-down cabin used by cowboys during the summer grazing season. Its roof sagged and its door hung crooked, but the walls were solid enough to keep out the wind. "It's not much, but it'll do," Sam said as they dismounted. "Jeb, get the horses around back, out of sight." Inside, the cabin was dusty but dry, with a small stone fireplace and a rough wooden table. Madeline helped Margaret settle onto a bench while Sam checked their supplies. "We're running low on ammunition," he said quietly, so only Madeline could hear. "If they find us here, it'll be a short fight. Then we won't let them find us," she replied with more confidence than she felt. As darkness fell, they risked a small fire, its light carefully shielded to prevent it from being seen through the single dirty window. They shared the last of their food, a somber meal eaten mostly in silence. After eating, Margaret fell into an exhausted sleep on a pile of old blankets they'd found in a corner. Jeb sat by the door, his young face set in determined lines as he kept watch. Madeline joined Sam at the window, where he stood peering into the darkness. "Do you think they're still following?" she asked softly. "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "Blackwell isn't a man who gives up easily." "Neither are we," Madeline said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Sam turned to look at her, really look at her for perhaps the first time. In the faint firelight, her auburn hair gleamed like copper, and her eyes, deep blue and unwavering, met his without fear. Despite the dirt on her face and the weariness in her posture, there was a beauty to her that went beyond the physical strength of spirit that called to something deep within him. "No," he agreed softly. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken emotions. Then Sam cleared his throat and turned back to the window. "You should get some sleep. I'll take first watch." But sleep remained elusive for Madeline. She lay beside her sister, listening to the wind moaning around the corners of the cabin and thinking about the man keeping vigilance by the window. In just a few days, Samuel Garrett had become the center of their hopes for survival and justice. And perhaps, though she scarcely dared admit it even to herself, something more. Sometime in the night, Madeline woke to the sound of voices. Sam and Jeb were talking quietly by the door. "Saw torches moving along the ridge," Jeb was saying. "They're searching the area systematically." "How many?" Sam's voice was calm, practical. "At least 8, maybe more. They've called in reinforcements." Madeline sat up, careful not to disturb Margaret. "What's happening?" she whispered, joining them. "Blackwell's men are closing in," Sam told her frankly. "We need to move before dawn." "The horses are exhausted," Madeline pointed out. "They can barely stand, let alone carry us at speed." Sam nodded, his face grim in the dying firelight. "I know." "That's why we're going to split up." "No," Madeline said immediately. "That's too dangerous. It's our best chance," Sam insisted. "Jeb knows these mountains. He can lead you and Margaret along the eastern trail towards Silverton. I'll take the western route, making enough noise to draw them after me." "And what happens when they catch you?" Madeline demanded. Sam's hand moved to his gun. "They won't take me alive." The matter-of-fact way he said it chilled Madeline to the bone. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself for us." "It's not your decision to make," Sam said, his voice gentle but firm. "My job is to get you and your sister to safety." "Your job," Madeline repeated, hurt flashing in her eyes. "Is that all this is to you?" Sam hesitated, clearly struggling with something inside himself. "No," he admitted finally. "Not anymore." Before Madeline could respond, Jeb, who had been watching through a crack in the door, hissed a warning. Riders approaching from the south, they froze, listening. Sure enough, the sound of hoofbeats carried on the night air, growing louder by the second. "Wake your sister," Sam ordered, reaching for his rifle. "Get ready to run if I give the word." Madeline shook Margaret awake as Sam and Jeb positioned themselves at the cabin's 2 windows. The approaching riders slowed, then stopped. In the silence that followed, they could hear men's voices, though not the words. "They know we're here," Jeb whispered, his young face pale with fear. "Hold steady," Sam replied, his finger on the trigger of his rifle. A voice called out from the darkness. "Garrett, we know you're in there. Send out the Anderson girls and you can ride away." "That's Wade Miller," Jeb said. "Blackwell's foreman. He's even meaner than the boss." Sam didn't respond to the call, instead motioning for everyone to stay low and quiet. "You've got 1 minute, Garrett, then we burn you out," Miller shouted. The threat hung in the air like a physical thing. Madeline looked around the dry wooden cabin and realized it would go up like tinder if they set it alight. Sam seemed to reach the same conclusion. "Back door?" he asked Jeb. The young man shook his head. "Just the one entrance." "Then we fight our way out," Sam decided. He turned to Madeline, his eyes intense. "When the shooting starts, take Margaret and run for the trees behind the cabin. Don't look back, just keep going east until you hit water, then follow it downstream towards Silverton." "What about you?" Madeline asked, her heart pounding. "Jeb and I will hold them off as long as we can, then follow." But the look in his eyes told her he didn't expect to make it. "No," Madeline said firmly. "We go together or not at all." Outside, Miller's patience was wearing thin. "Time's up, Garrett." Sam opened his mouth to argue further, but before he could speak, the sound of fresh gunfire erupted, not directed at the cabin, but at Miller and his men. Shouts of confusion and pain filled the night air. "What the hell?" Sam muttered, risking a glance through the window. Through the darkness, they could make out new riders attacking Miller's men from the flank. The surprise assault had scattered the outlaws, who were returning fire wildly. "Who are they?" Margaret asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," Sam admitted, "but they're buying us time. Let's move." They gathered their meager possessions and slipped out the door while Miller's attention was divided. In the chaos of the nighttime battle, they managed to reach their horses and mount up undetected. As they rode away from the cabin, one of the mysterious riders broke away from the fight and approached them. In the faint moonlight, Madeline recognized the Stetson hat and silver conchos of Sheriff Tom Wallace from Silverton. "Sheriff Wallace," she called in disbelief. The man rode closer, revealing a weather-beaten face beneath the hat brim. "Miss Anderson, your friend Hannah Johnson sent a telegram saying you might need help." Relief washed over Madeline so strongly she nearly fell from her horse. "Hannah contacted you," Wallace nodded. "Said you and your sister had been kidnapped by Vernon Blackwell's men and that a bounty hunter named Garrett was trying to bring you in." He glanced at Sam. "I'm guessing that's you." Sam nodded, still wary. "How did you find us?" "Wasn't hard. Blackwell's men were making enough noise to wake the dead, and they're not exactly skilled at moving through the mountains undetected." Wallace gestured toward the ongoing skirmish. "I brought 6 deputies. We've been tracking Blackwell for months, trying to build a case against him." "This might just be what we needed." The sound of gunfire was diminishing, suggesting the fight was nearly over. "Is it safe to approach your men?" Sam asked. "Should be. They know I rode ahead to find you." Wallace turned his horse. "Come on, let's get you folks to safety." They followed the sheriff back toward the cabin, where the shooting had stopped entirely. Several of Blackwell's men lay on the ground, either dead or wounded, while others had been disarmed and sat under guard. Wade Miller was among the captured, his face contorted with rage as he saw the Anderson sisters riding in with Sam and the sheriff. "This ain't over," he snarled. "Blackwell has friends in high places. You'll never make these charges stick." "Maybe not," Wallace conceded. "But kidnapping 2 innocent women and murdering their father, that's enough to hang you all, high places or not." Miller's face paled and he fell silent. The sheriff introduced them to his deputies, a rough-looking but professional group of men who had clearly seen their share of trouble. "We'll camp here for the night," Wallace decided. "At first light, we'll escort you all back to Silverton where you can give formal statements." For the first time in days, Madeline felt the crushing weight of fear lift from her shoulders. They weren't safe yet, but with the sheriff's men around them and the worst of Blackwell's gang captured or scattered, their chances had improved dramatically. As the deputies set up a proper camp, Sam pulled Madeline aside. "You should rest," he said. "It's been a long few days." She studied his face in the light of the newly built campfire. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. But there was something else there too, a softness when he looked at her that hadn't been present before. "What will you do now?" she asked. "When this is all over," Sam hesitated, then shrugged. "Go back to hunting my counterfeiter, I suppose." But he didn't sound convinced, and then, Madeline pressed. "Another bounty after that, and another." "It's what I do," he said simply. "Is it what you want to do?" She hadn't meant to ask such a personal question, but the words came out anyway. Sam looked surprised, as if no one had ever asked him that before. "I haven't thought much about wanting anything else," he admitted. "Not for a long time." Before Madeline could respond, Sheriff Wallace called them over to discuss the plan for the morning. The moment of connection broke, but something had shifted between them. A question had been asked that would require an answer sooner or later. As they settled around the fire for a meal of bacon and beans prepared by the deputies, Madeline found herself watching Sam across the flames. For all his competence and courage, there was a loneliness about him that called to her own. They had both lost family, both been forced to be stronger than they might have chosen. And in that recognition, something new was beginning to grow. The journey to Silverton the next day was tense but uneventful. Sheriff Wallace's men remained vigilant, expecting Blackwell to send more men after them, but no attack materialized. Silverton welcomed them with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. The sheriff installed the Anderson sisters in the town's small hotel, posting deputies outside their door as a precaution. Sam was offered a room at the jailhouse where he could help guard the prisoners while the telegraph wires hummed with messages to the federal marshal in Denver. For 3 days, Madeline and Margaret gave statements describing in painful detail their father's murder and their subsequent abduction. Jeb testified too, turning state's evidence against Blackwell and his men in exchange for leniency. On the evening of the 3rd day, Sam found Madeline sitting alone on the hotel's small veranda, watching the sunset paint the surrounding mountains in shades of gold and purple. "May I join you?" he asked, hat in hand. Madeline nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "How are the prisoners?" "Secure," Sam replied, settling into the chair. "The marshal is sending men from Denver. They should arrive tomorrow to transport Miller and the others for trial." "And Blackwell?" Sam's expression darkened. "Still at large." But with his foreman and key men in custody, his days of operating freely are numbered. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Finally, Madeline asked the question that had been on her mind. "What will happen to our land?" "The gold claim," Sam turned to face her. "Sheriff Wallace says that as your father's heirs, you and Margaret legally own everything. The claim is still valid, and once Blackwell is dealt with, you can return to work it if you choose." Return. The idea seemed both appealing and terrifying. "I don't know if Maggie could bear to live in that place again after what happened." "You could sell the claim," Sam suggested. "Use the money to start fresh somewhere else." Madeline considered this. "Perhaps, though it feels like letting Blackwell win somehow." "He doesn't win if you use what your father built to create the life you want," Sam said quietly. His words struck a chord with Madeline. "The life I want," she repeated thoughtfully. "I'm not sure I know what that is anymore." Sam hesitated, then reached out to cover her hand with his own. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "Or tomorrow. Take the time you need." The warmth of his hand on her sent a flutter through Madeline's chest. "And what about you? Will you be moving on soon, chasing your counterfeiter?" Sam's eyes, usually so guarded, revealed a hint of uncertainty. "I thought I would," he admitted, "but now I'm not so sure." "What's changed?" Madeline asked, though she hoped she knew the answer. Sam looked down at their joined hands, then back up to meet her gaze. "I've spent years drifting from one job to the next, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. It seemed safer that way after the war. And now I'm wondering if safety is really what I've been looking for." His grip tightened slightly on her hand. "These past days, watching you fight for your sister, for justice for your father, it reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond the next bounty." Madeline's heart beat faster at his words. "And do you care, I mean?" "Yes," Sam said simply, "more than I expected to." Before Madeline could respond, the hotel door opened, and Margaret stepped onto the veranda. Sam withdrew his hand discreetly as the younger Anderson sister joined them. "Sheriff Wallace is asking for you, Mr. Garrett," Margaret said. "Something about a telegram from Denver." Sam nodded, rising reluctantly. "Duty calls," he said to Madeline. "We'll continue this conversation later." "I'd like that," she replied, offering a small smile that he returned before striding away toward the sheriff's office. Margaret took the seat Sam had vacated, watching her sister with knowing eyes. "He cares for you," she said softly. "Anyone can see it." Madeline felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Perhaps, more than perhaps," Margaret insisted, "the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. It's like you're the only person in the world." Madeline couldn't deny the flutter of happiness these words brought. "It's complicated, Maggie. We've only known him a few days and under the most extreme circumstances." "Sometimes that's when people's true characters are revealed," Margaret pointed out, "and his has been nothing but honorable and brave." It was true. In the short time they'd known Samuel Garrett, he had risked his life repeatedly to protect them from men who would have done far worse than kill them. He had shown himself to be not just courageous but kind, principled, and surprisingly gentle despite his rough exterior. What would Father think? Madeline wondered aloud. Margaret smiled sadly. He'd say a man should be judged by his actions, not his past, and Mr. Garrett's actions speak volumes. Later that night, lying in her hotel bed listening to Margaret's soft breathing from the other bed, Madeline allowed herself to think about the future. Could she really rebuild her life from the ashes of what Blackwell had destroyed? And could Samuel Garrett be part of that new beginning? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. So much had happened so quickly. Her father was barely cold in his grave, their home burned to cinders, and yet her heart insisted on looking forward rather than back. Perhaps that was what survival meant in this harsh land, the ability to honor what was lost while still embracing what might be. Her father had taught them that, bringing them west after their mother's death, building a new life from nothing but determination and hard work. As sleep finally claimed her, Madeline decided that whatever came next, she would face it with the same courage. The arrival of the federal marshal the next day brought a flurry of activity to Silverton. The prisoners were transferred to his custody, formal charges were filed, and depositions were taken from all witnesses. The marshal, a stern-faced man named James Harker, was particularly interested in building a case against Vernon Blackwell himself. "We've had our eye on him for some time," Harker explained to Madeline and Sam as they sat in Sheriff Wallace's office. "Blackwell's been squeezing small ranchers and miners out of their claims for years, but until now, no one's been willing to testify against him." "His men murdered my father in cold blood," Madeline said, her voice steady despite the pain the words brought. "I'll testify to that and more," Marshal Harker nodded approvingly. "Your testimony, along with your sister's and young Jeb's, should be enough to bring charges. But actually finding Blackwell is another matter. He's gone to ground somewhere." "What about our property?" Madeline asked. "Is it safe for us to return?" "Not yet," Harker said bluntly. "Blackwell still has men loyal to him in the area. Until we apprehend him, I'd advise you to stay far from Eagle Springs." The news was disheartening, though not unexpected. Madeline had known they couldn't simply return to their life as if nothing had happened. After the meeting, Sam walked her back to the hotel. "The marshal's right," he said. "It's not safe for you and Margaret at your homestead yet," Madeline sighed. "So we're effectively homeless, at least for now. You have options," Sam pointed out. "You could stay here in Silverton or perhaps go to Denver until the trial." "On what money?" Madeline asked practically. "Everything we had was in that cabin." Sam hesitated, then said, "I have some savings, not much, but enough to see you both settled somewhere safe until this is over." The offer touched Madeline deeply, but her pride balked at accepting charity even from him. "That's very generous, but we couldn't possibly." "It's not charity," Sam interrupted. "Consider it an advance against your gold claim. Once you're able to work it again, you can pay me back if it matters to you." Madeline studied his face, seeing nothing but sincere concern there. "Why would you do that for us?" Sam's expression softened. "I think you know why, Madeline." The way he said her name, with a gentleness that belied his rugged appearance, made her heart skip. Before she could continue, a commotion in the street drew their attention. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered with sweat. He pulled up in front of the sheriff's office, shouting for Wallace. Sam and Madeline hurried over as the man dismounted. It was one of Wallace's deputies, who had been patrolling the area around Silverton. "Blackwell's been spotted," the deputy reported breathlessly. "He's holed up at the old Chambers mine with about a dozen men. They've got it fortified like a fortress." Sheriff Wallace emerged from his office, the marshal close behind. "How far?" "About 15 miles northwest." "I came as soon as I confirmed it was him." Marshal Harker turned to Wallace. "We need to move quickly before he slips away again. How many men can you spare?" "I've got 4 deputies in town, plus myself," Wallace replied. "Enough to surround the mine, but storming it would be risky." "I'll come too," Sam offered. "I know how Blackwell operates." Madeline felt a surge of fear at the thought of Sam confronting Blackwell and his men. "It's too dangerous," she protested. "This is what I do," Sam reminded her gently. "Gather your men," Marshal Harker instructed Wallace. "We ride in an hour." As the lawmen dispersed to prepare, Madeline pulled Sam aside. "You don't have to do this," she said. "You've already done more than enough for us." Sam shook his head. "It's not just about you and Margaret anymore, though that would be reason enough. Blackwell needs to be stopped before he hurts anyone else." Madeline knew he was right, but that didn't ease her fear. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," Sam said, his eyes holding hers. "And when this is over, we'll finish that conversation we started." An hour later, Sam rode out with the marshal, the sheriff, and 6 deputies. Madeline watched them go, a sense of foreboding settling over her like a physical weight. Margaret joined her on the hotel porch. "They'll be back," she said, slipping her arm through her sister's. "Mr. Garrett especially." "I hope so," Madeline replied, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The Chambers mine was an abandoned silver operation nestled in a narrow canyon. Its entrance was partially collapsed, but the main shaft remained accessible, along with several outbuildings that had once housed equipment and supplies. It made for an excellent defensive position, with clear lines of sight in all directions and limited approaches. Sam crouched behind a boulder with Marshal Harker and Sheriff Wallace, studying the layout through a spyglass. 2 of Blackwell's men stood guard at the mine entrance, while others could be seen moving between the buildings. "We're outnumbered," Wallace observed, "and they've got the high ground." "A frontal assault would be suicide," Sam agreed, "but there might be another way in." He explained that many of these older mines had secondary exits escape routes in case of cave-ins. If they could locate such an entrance, they might be able to take Blackwell by surprise. "I'll scout the ridgeline," Sam volunteered. "Most ventilation shafts were dug from above." Marshal Harker nodded. "Do it. We'll keep their attention focused here." Sam worked his way around the canyon, climbing the steep slope behind the mine. The going was treacherous, with loose rock threatening to give way beneath his feet and alert those below. But years of tracking fugitives through difficult terrain had taught him patience and sure-footedness. Near the top of the ridge, he found what he was looking for: a narrow shaft covered with weathered planks. Carefully removing the boards, he discovered a vertical tunnel dropping into darkness, with iron rungs embedded in one side. Returning to the lawman, he reported his finding. "The shaft looks stable enough. I can go down and come up behind them while you create a distraction at the front." "It's risky," Harker warned. "If they spot you coming up inside, you'll be trapped." "It's our best chance of taking Blackwell alive," Sam pointed out. After some discussion, they agreed on the plan. Sam would descend the shaft and make his way through the mine while the lawmen staged a commotion at the main entrance, drawing attention away from him. As Sam prepared to leave, Sheriff Wallace handed him a deputy's badge. "Might as well make it official," he said. "You've earned it." Sam stared at the star for a moment before pinning it to his vest. He hadn't worn a badge since his Pinkerton days, and the weight of it felt both familiar and strange. The climb down the ventilation shaft was harrowing. The iron rungs were rusted and loose in places, threatening to pull free from the rock wall. The shaft descended nearly 60 feet before opening onto a narrow tunnel that connected to the main mine workings. Sam moved cautiously through the darkness, guided by the faint sound of voices echoing through the tunnels. The air was stale and thick with dust, making breathing difficult and silent movement even more challenging. Eventually, he reached a junction where the tunnel widened. Light spilled from around a corner along with the murmur of conversation. Pressing himself against the wall, Sam inched closer until he could make out the words. "Can't stay here forever," someone was saying. "The gold claim ain't worth dying for." "It ain't just about the gold anymore," replied a deeper voice that Sam recognized as Blackwell's. "It's about making an example. No one defies me in lives to talk about it." "The Anderson girls already talked plenty," the first voice argued. "The marshal has Miller and the others." "It's over, boss." The sound of a blow and a grunt of pain followed this statement. "It's over when I say it's over," Blackwell growled. "And I'm not finished with those Anderson girls yet, especially the older one." The threat against Madeline sent a surge of anger through Sam. He checked his revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded and prepared to make his move. Before he could, the agreed-upon distraction began. Shouts and gunfire erupted from the direction of the mine entrance. "They found us," someone yelled. "Lawmen, at least 10 of them, hold your positions." Blackwell ordered, "This place is defensible as long as we control the entrance." In the ensuing chaos, Sam slipped around the corner to find himself in what had once been the mine's main chamber. Lanterns hung from support beams, illuminating a group of armed men scrambling to respond to the attack. Blackwell stood in the center, a bear of a man with a thick beard and cold eyes, shouting orders. Sam stepped fully into the room, his revolver leveled at Blackwell's chest. "It's over, Blackwell," he announced. "You're under arrest for the murder of Daniel Anderson and the kidnapping of his daughters." The outlaws froze, caught between the threat at the entrance and the unexpected appearance of a lawman in their midst. Blackwell recovered first, his hand dropping toward his holstered gun. "Garrett," he snarled, "should have known you'd be involved." "Don't," Sam warned as Blackwell's fingers brushed his weapon. "I only need you alive, the rest is negotiable." For a tense moment, the outcome hung in the balance. Then one of Blackwell's men, panicking, fired a shot toward Sam. The bullet ricocheted off a support beam and chaos erupted. Sam dove behind a stack of crates as gunfire filled the chamber. Return fire from the lawmen at the entrance added to the confusion, with bullets whizzing in from both directions. Through the mayhem, Sam kept his focus on Blackwell, who was working his way toward a side tunnel and escape route. Sam couldn't let him get away, not after everything he'd done. Waiting for a lull in the shooting, Sam broke from cover and sprinted across the chamber. He tackled Blackwell just as the outlaw reached the tunnel entrance, driving him to the ground with bone-jarring force. Blackwell was a powerful man, and he fought with the desperate strength of someone who knew the hangman awaited if he was captured. He landed a crushing blow to Sam's ribs, then another to his jaw, momentarily stunning him. As Blackwell scrambled for his fallen gun, Sam recovered enough to kick it away, then launched himself at the outlaw again. They grappled in the dirt, each seeking an advantage, their breath coming in harsh gasps. "You should have minded your own business, Garrett," Blackwell wheezed, attempting to gouge at Sam's eyes. Sam blocked the move and drove his fist into Blackwell's midsection. "The Andersons are my business now," he replied through gritted teeth. With a roar of rage, Blackwell heaved upward, throwing Sam off balance. The outlaw seized the opportunity to draw a hidden knife from his boot. He slashed wildly, the blade slicing through Sam's shirt and drawing blood from his arm. Pain lanced through Sam, but he'd been wounded before and knew how to fight through it. He waited for Blackwell to lunge again, then sidestepped the attack. Grabbing the outlaw's knife arm, Sam wrenched it backward until he heard the satisfying crack of breaking bone. Blackwell howled in pain, dropping the knife. Sam delivered a final, decisive blow to the outlaw's temple, sending him crashing to the ground, unconscious. Only then did Sam become aware that the gunfire had stopped. Looking up, he saw Marshal Harker and Sheriff Wallace standing at the main entrance to the chamber, their weapons trained on the remaining outlaws who had wisely chosen to surrender. "Well done, Deputy," Harker said, eyeing the unconscious Blackwell with satisfaction. Sam nodded, suddenly feeling the full effect of his injuries. His ribs throbbed where Blackwell had struck him, and blood flowed freely from the knife wound on his arm. "Let's get these men secured," he said, fighting to keep his voice steady, "and send someone to Silverton with the news." As they bound Blackwell's hands and feet, Sam allowed himself to think of Madeline. He had kept his promise Blackwell would face justice for his crimes against her family. But more than that, she and Margaret would now be free to return to their land, to rebuild what had been taken from them. Whether Sam would be part of that rebuilding remained to be seen. The conversation they had started remained unfinished, and much could change in the aftermath of violence. The ride back to Silverton was slow and painful for Sam. The knife wound, while not life-threatening, was deep enough to require stitches, and his ribs protested every movement of his horse. But he refused offers to leave him behind with some of the deputies while the others transported the prisoners. He needed to see Madeline with his own eyes, to tell her that Blackwell would never threaten her again. The procession reached Silverton near sunset, drawing a crowd as they rode down the main street. The captured outlaws, including a now conscious and sullenly silent Blackwell, were led directly to the jailhouse. Sam dismounted carefully in front of the hotel, where Madeline and Margaret stood on the porch, alerted by the commotion. When Madeline saw the bloodstains on his shirt, her face paled and she rushed down the steps toward him. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for him but hesitating, afraid of causing more pain. "It looks worse than it is," Sam assured her, though the effort of speaking normally cost him. "Blackwell's in custody. It's over." Tears welled in Madeline's eyes, tears of relief, of joy, of emotions too complex to name. "Come inside," she said, taking his uninjured arm. "We need to tend to those wounds." In the sisters' hotel room, Margaret boiled water while Madeline carefully cut away Sam's bloodied shirt. The knife wound was still seeping, and dark bruises were already forming along his rib cage. "These ribs might be cracked," she said, her fingers gently probing the injury. "You need a doctor." "Later," Sam replied. "First, tell me how you both are holding up." Madeline's hands stilled on his arm. "We're better now that we know Blackwell can't hurt anyone else. Thank you for what you did, Sam, for all of it." Their eyes met and held, the unspoken feelings between them growing stronger by the moment. Margaret, sensing the shift in atmosphere, discreetly excused herself to fetch the doctor. When they were alone, Sam reached up to touch Madeline's cheek. "I meant what I said before. When this is over, I want to have that conversation about what comes next." "Is it over now?" she asked softly. "Almost," he said. "There's still the matter of the trial and helping you and Margaret reclaim your land." Madeline covered his hand with her own. "And after that?" Sam took a deep breath, wincing slightly at the pain in his ribs. "After that, I was thinking I might need to find a more settled line of work. Bounty hunting isn't much of a life for a man who's found something worth staying in one place for." "And have you found something worth staying for?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I believe I have," Sam replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "If she'll have me." Madeline's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. "She might," she said, "given time to know you better under less dire circumstances." "Time is something I can offer," Sam said, returning her smile, "along with whatever else I have." The moment was interrupted by the arrival of the doctor, a harried-looking man who immediately set about examining Sam's wounds with professional detachment. The knife cut required 12 stitches, and the ribs, while not broken, were indeed cracked and would need time to heal. "Bed rest for at least a week," the doctor prescribed sternly. "No riding, no fighting, no chasing outlaws." "I've caught the only outlaw that matters," Sam replied, his eyes finding Madeline's across the room. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal proceedings. The territorial court convened in Silverton to hear the case against Vernon Blackwell and his men. Madeline and Margaret testified about their father's murder and their abduction, their dignified courage impressing even the most hardened observers. Jeb's testimony proved crucial, providing insider details about Blackwell's criminal enterprise. In exchange, the young man received a reduced sentence with the possibility of parole in 3 years. Sam testified as well. his status as a deputy carrying weight with the judge and jury. His reputation as a former Pinkerton agent and respected bounty hunter added credibility to the prosecution's case. The verdict, when it came, was unanimous: guilty on all counts. Vernon Blackwell was sentenced to hang, while his men received varying prison terms based on their level of involvement and prior records. With justice served, Madeline and Margaret could finally contemplate returning to their land. Sheriff Wallace sent deputies ahead to Eagle Springs to ensure it was safe and to begin assessing what remained of their property. "The cabin's gone," Wallace reported upon their return, "but the barn's still standing and the gold claim is intact. With the right workers, you could have a working operation within months." It was both heartening and daunting news. Rebuilding would require money they didn't have, even with the potential wealth of the gold claim. "I've been thinking about that," Sam said when Madeline expressed her concerns. His ribs were healing well and he moved with only occasional stiffness now. "The offer I made before still stands. My savings can get you started and I'm pretty handy with tools." "You'd help us rebuild?" Margaret asked, her eyes wide. "If you'll let me," Sam replied, his gaze fixed on Madeline. "People will talk," she said, though her tone was more thoughtful than concerned. "A single man helping two unmarried women rebuild their homestead." "Let them talk," Sam said with a shrug, or he let the word hang between them, its implications clear. They had grown closer during his recovery, spending long hours in conversation as he regained his strength. Madeline had shared stories of her childhood in Missouri, of her mother's gentle wisdom and her father's determined optimism. Sam had gradually opened up about his own past his service in the Union cavalry, the horrors he'd witnessed during the war, and his subsequent wandering years. They had discovered shared values, compatible temperaments, and a growing affection that had deepened into something neither could deny. Margaret looked between them, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "I think I'll go see if the telegraph office has any messages from Hannah," she said, excusing herself from the hotel room with transparent intent. When they were alone, Sam moved to sit beside Madeline on the small settee. "I know it hasn't been long," he began, "and maybe this is too soon, but it's not too soon," Madeline interrupted softly. "Not when you've already risked your life for us, not when I already know the kind of man you are." Encouraged, Sam took her hand in his. "I've lived a solitary life for a long time, Madeline. I told myself it was simpler that way, safer. But meeting you and Margaret, seeing how you fight for each other and for what's right, it reminded me what I've been missing." "And what's that?" she asked. "A home," he said simply. "A purpose beyond the next job, someone to come back to at the end of the day." Madeline's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Samuel Garrett?" he nodded, suddenly nervous despite facing down outlaws and killers without flinching. "I'm asking if you might consider becoming Madeline Garrett in time. Not right away, we should rebuild the farm first, get to know each other better in peaceful times. But eventually, if you find you could care for me as I already care for you." Madeline's laugh was soft and joyful. "I already care for you more than I thought possible in such a short time," she confessed. "And yes, I would consider becoming Madeline Garrett, very seriously indeed." The kiss that followed was tender, a promise of things to come rather than a passionate culmination. They had time to build not just a home but a life together. 2 months later, the Anderson farmstead was taking shape once more. The new cabin was larger and sturdier than the original, with stone foundations and thick log walls. Sam had hired skilled workers from Silverton with his savings, and Madeline had contributed her share by selling a small portion of the gold claim to a reputable mining company. Margaret had blossomed in the aftermath of their ordeal, discovering a talent for bookkeeping that proved valuable as they established their mining operation. She had also begun corresponding with a young man in Denver, the son of the assayer who had evaluated their gold samples. As for Madeline and Sam, they worked side by side during the day and sat together on the new porch each evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Their wedding was planned for the fall, once the cabin was finished and the mining operation fully established. On a warm summer evening, as they sat in their customary places, Madeline turned to Sam with a contemplative expression. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. The excitement of tracking criminals, the freedom of answering to no one. Sam considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the simplicity of it," he admitted. "Knowing exactly what my purpose was each day, but the freedom, that was an illusion." He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across her palm. "I was never free, not really. I was running from the past, from the memories of the war, from the possibility of losing someone else I cared about. And now," Madeline asked softly, "now I understand that real freedom comes from choosing to stay, not from the ability to leave." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I've never felt more free than I do right here with you." Madeline leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "I never thought I'd be grateful to Vernon Blackwell for anything," she said. "But if he hadn't taken us that night, you might never have come into our lives." "I'd like to think we would have found each other somehow," Sam replied, "maybe in less dramatic circumstances." "Maybe," Madeline agreed, "but we Anderson women have never done things the easy way." Sam laughed, pulling her closer. "Soon to be Garrett women," he reminded her, "at least one of you." Margaret emerged from the cabin, a telegram in her hand. "Letter from Hannah," she announced. "She's coming to visit next month and bringing her parents. They want to see the famous gold mine that caused so much trouble." "They'll be our first official guests," Madeline said. "We should finish the spare room before they arrive." As Margaret returned inside, Sam gazed out at the land that had brought them together through tragedy and triumph. The gold in the creek had been both curse and blessing. It had cost Daniel Anderson his life, but it had also set in motion the events that brought Sam to Madeline. "I never believed in fate," he said thoughtfully. "Always figured a man made his own way in the world through hard work and determination." "And now," Madeline asked, "now I wonder if sometimes we get nudged in the right direction, whether we recognize it at the time or not." He turned to face her fully. "All those years of wandering, and somehow I ended up in Eagle Springs just when you needed someone to come after you." Madeline smiled, touching his face gently. "Maybe you needed someone to come after you too, Sam Garrett, someone to bring you home." "Home," he repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I reckon that's exactly what I needed." As the sun disappeared behind the mountains, casting the valley in purple shadows, they remained on the porch, two souls who had found in each other the courage to build something lasting from the ashes of loss. The journey that had begun with gunfire and desperate flight had led them here, to this peaceful moment and the promise of countless more to come, in the mining town of Eagle Springs. Folks still tell the story of how Vernon Blackwell's greed led to his downfall. They speak of the Anderson sisters, who survived against impossible odds, and the bounty hunter who tracked them for days through the wilderness and brought them home. But the true story, the one Madeline and Samuel Garrett told their children and grandchildren in the years that followed, was about finding love in the most unexpected circumstances and building a life rich with purpose and devotion. It was a story that began with loss but ended with gain, a journey that transformed strangers into family and a simple gold claim into a legacy that sustained generations. And it all started on that fateful night when the Outlaws took her and her sister, and a determined cowboy refused to let them disappear.